Rolling. Yay! Hi everyone. Thank you so much for coming. So lovely to see you. My name's Kate. I'm the Director of Programs here at Tempest. We are so happy to be celebrating the closing of this fantastic show, Daisies, which features 7 artists, 3 of which are here today. And so I'm going to let everyone introduce themselves and gesture at their work, and then we'll dive into some questions. Nava.
Hi, my name is 𝙇𝙤𝙜𝙖𝙬𝙬, and that's my work over there. It's the bowls/vessels sitting on the concrete blocks.
Hi, I'm Sumita Kamiseti, and I have a few different works in the show. We have the textiles at the back, the ceramic shapes, the ceramic fragment to your right, and then handmade paper over here, and then a ceramic fragment over here.
Hi, I'm Logan Blagg. I made the stalactite column shapes, creatures there, and the creatures over here. They're soft and fluffy, so I urge you to touch them.
Fantastic. Okay, so my first question is pretty open-ended. I'm curious to hear in your own words, what was your earliest creative experiences and how did it shape the practice that you maintain today? We'll just go in order.
Oh my God.
I mean, to put you on the spot. We'll alternate.
Oh, please, yes, that's way better.
Yeah, so I was. Hi.
Yes, please. Is it okay if we close the door? I'm having trouble hearing. Thank you. Okay, fabulous.
Yeah, so I was born to Iranian parents in Eswatini, and I was thinking about how, like, on a molecular level, information is passed generationally, but also I got quite interested in, like, their family histories and stories. So I sat down and started interviewing family members about their histories and stories. And I thought, I was going to make a documentary or a podcast with their stories, more broadly about, like, the Iranian migration from Iran to Africa as, like, this big, huge project. And my friend and I did an application for a podcast grant with Google and another one. Google was one of them. We were shortlisted, and we got pissed off because we weren't selected. But you know that. That's one of, like, I think my more earlier serious kind of entry points into thinking about and making art from, like, a family and a historic archive.
Amazing. Yeah, so that sounds like a really tangible way in which you were actively reflecting on your past and that informed the current body of work, or things that are in the room as you make your current work. Amazing.
Yeah. The question was our early experience.
Yeah, just like, I'm sure there were formative experiences that helped shape you as an artist.
Yeah.
It could be memories, or it could be active reflections.
I think, so I guess background, I was born in the US in Portland, and I moved to India when I was 5, and then moved back to the US at 18 for school. So I've been hopping around for a little bit. I think some of my, like, early experiences, I think I look back on, so the first school that I attended when I was in India was in a forest, the first school. It was called the Valley School, and it was, like, very influenced and led by this philosopher and writer called 𝙇𝙤𝙜𝙖𝙬𝙬 𝘽𝙤𝙬, and he really emphasized an education system that was very in tune with nature and with the ground, and embracing, like, observation, attention, observing your natural environment, and freedom of, like, rejecting rigid systems of thought. And I just remember, like, making a lot, barefoot. And I think that's the first place where I understood what community kind of looked like, because it was very much like a non-hierarchical setup. And I interacted with classmates or peers from the year above and the year below, and we all were just one school together. But I think looking back, it has kind of made me understand that the process, art making, can be intuitive. It can be led by observation, process as sort of an exploration, rather than having a certain answer. And yeah, I think because I was exposed to different ways of making, maybe because the school emphasized art a lot through decorative, folk art, Indian art, music, and all of that. I think materials became my collaborators rather than a tool. And I think that's influenced the way that I approach art making today.
Beautiful.
Cool. Yeah.
That is so incredibly formative, and just what a joy.
I know. You know what? At the time, I didn't really understand the significance of all of it, but reflecting a lot, I'm oh, actually, it started there.
And it's so unique.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know a lot of early experiences that are so supportive, but
Yeah.
that's amazing.
Yeah.
Well, I grew up in a tiny town in Arkansas, but my mom and my grandma had a jewelry store pretty much opened around the time I was born. And there's photos of me as a baby in a box in this jewelry store. But I just grew up working there around them. They were always designing, buying, just it was where I went after school. It was my summer vacations. I would go to buying trips with them, and just we were kind of known as the three generations doing this thing, and it was a very special way to know my mom and my grandma in a light that even my dad and my brothers didn't know, but also they really encouraged me to draw, to figure out what I liked and why I liked the certain pieces. And yeah, I was around them and watching my grandma manhandle, for lack of a better term, some jeweler trying to sell her diamonds. I'm what a badass. And she's doing this, and then she's taking this stone and making it into this little tiny beautiful piece that only this one person has thought of. And it just,
Yeah.
yeah, it really was a cool way to grow up, and I think about it all the time.
It's so beautiful. To have creative people in your life when you're young truly validates the intuition to follow that. And it's so, and it's your first education in a way. So I would love, okay, so we've kind of explored some of the familial and literal genealogical context in which your creative life emerged, but I'm also curious if we could, even in a more conceptual way, consider how our artistic ancestors, or the people for whom we feel we are in a macrocosm of conversation with, if you could share, who do you feel you're, for lack of a better word, speaking with, in conversation with?
Yeah, I mean, I would definitely say my grandma. I mean, I'm talking with her all the time. Sometimes a bird flies into the shop and I'm hi Nana. I feel she is someone who just helped foster this creativity from me in a young age, but also helped. I don't know that much about my ancestors prior to that, but I know that she's the powerhouse of my spirit. So definitely she's for me.
I mean, I think a lot about, I entered artistry through photography, so I think a lot about female photographers. A big inspiration for me is 𝙇𝙤𝙜𝙖𝙘𝙖𝙜, She's a South African photographer, and she has this incredible self-portrait series where she's very directly confronting the camera and the gaze. And I think that's a really powerful act of disputing this lineage of photography in ancestral lands or in indigenous lands as an extractive thing, and her like taking power and control over it for her own narratives. Similarly, I think of 𝘾𝙘𝙖𝙘𝙘, her kitchen table series. This like, again, a Black woman taking control of the narrative in a domestic setting, and the multitudes that a singular place can hold for a person of this identity. I really like 𝙤𝙤𝙬𝙖𝙬𝙬, and she said, she has a quote where she feels deeply empowered by having many roots, and I feel the same way. Like it's such a huge blessing to have these like multiple ancestries to pull on, both like through my blood, but also through the places that I have been born to and grown up in.
Do you also mind sharing, like, what are those places that you feel like you're drawing on?
Yeah. So my personal history is a bit complex in that my parents are of Iranian descent, and both of them of Jewish Iranian descent, which then converted to the Baha'i faith. And then my parents immigrated to Southern Africa, where I was born, and spent my whole life in Africa. So, well, the majority of my life until now. So I feel like deeply rooted in African cultures, and like not just one African culture. There's a multitude that I've been exposed to and very blessed to be part of, but also grappling with this idea of like also my parents' histories and identities, which are, like I alluded to, like transferred both on a cellular level, on a language level, and like cultures in the home. Yeah.
Beautiful. I guess for me, I think broadly speaking, I am really influenced, by my immediate environment. Usually look at architecture, nature, symbols, like rituals, traditions. I kind of see all of these elements as like somewhat of a living language. And then when I spent a lot of time in India, like especially during the pandemic where I was for 1.5 years, I got to see a lot of these rituals and traditions play out on a day-to-day basis, and just was appreciating the simple gestures, the beauty, the impermanence of some of these traditions. And I think one that stands out to me and is very special to me is, some of you might be familiar with, it's called columns, and they're patterns drawn on doorsteps every morning, drawn with rice flour, and usually by the women of the household. And so it's passed down through oral tradition. So my mom learned from her mom, my grandma learned from her mother, and I kind of learned from my mom, but not so well. And yeah, just inspired by these gestures and rituals. And although I think some of my key influences have been like my grandma, my mom, and my dad. My mom always loved to draw, like she would draw these columns every day in her notebook growing up. And my dad had a stamp collection, which he collected stamps.
My dad too.
Yeah, I think it's a dad thing. And he like stored all of them meticulously in his dad's like briefcase. And so every time I go home, I like sift through the stamps. But I think even my grandma, she would like every summer, she's no longer with us, but every summer she would like pull me aside and like teach me all these prayers and chants. And I was like, I don't want to do this. But she like hand wrote all these like prayers, and we still have like a little booklet with everything. I've committed it to memory, which is great, but just a lot of acts of care that are rooted, in these practices. But I think another thought that comes to mind is all of these are acts of like archiving, acts of remembering and preserving a lived experience. And I think something that's I'm really fascinated with is like art as archive. And I'm influenced by a lot of artists, but I think in the present day, some work that's really stood out to me. There was a show at Asia Art Archive with an artist named Mrinalini Mukherjee. She's a sculptor and she makes these monumental sculptures, fiber sculptures. And a lot of like what I read about the curatorial like description was they discovered her archive, which was very meticulously kept in a lot of notes to like how she wanted her work like framed or like unloading notes or simple things. And you would think that something like textiles would be so organic and fluid, but then seeing an artist be so meticulous in their archiving and their documentation really like shifts your perspective of the work. And that was really fascinating to me, seeing someone's archive, something so personal and intimate, and then seeing these sculptures like out in public, just the relationship between that. And then Hilma has always been my favorite. And the recent show at the MoMA, What Stands Behind the Flowers, I think that's what it's called. It's still up. I think everyone should see it. I think it was also a beautiful reminder of not only seeing this like index of like botanical drawings, but also a deep engagement with place and the physical world. And yeah, art as archive always, I think that's an important theme for me, or I'm also invested or like particular about how I document my work and like writing notes and like making sure that I don't ever forget what material I used in these processes. But yeah.
Wonderful, wonderful. Okay, so I feel like we've at least developed a little bit of baseline of your practices. We were in conversation with something that is so truly important to this exhibition is materiality and the sources of what goes into an artwork. So we're going to shift gears just a bit to speak to that theme. And I guess the first thing I wanted to ask, actually I'm mixing up the order a bit. Logan, you had mentioned that the shop is, I wasn't aware of this, but you run Lagoon, you co-run Lagoon, and it's something that you inherited from like a matrilineal line, which is so beautiful because it allows you to create like wearable works of art and focus on design. And this is yet another like manifestation of that practice. So I was just curious if you could illuminate some of the new opportunities that fiber sculpture distinctly allows, and yeah, just maybe differences, but also similarities of those practices.
It's been really interesting. I mean, I've been like doing these forms in like my head for a long time, but physically they've not been like stretched out to this extent ever. And it's been really interesting because I like make clothes for bodies, and as much as bodies are different shapes, but they like only go so far. So I'm like making something like this is like, feels like I have no boundaries and like no limitations. And it's been really fun to like explore like just shapes in a way that aren't like meant for like a figure, but they're also like making their own figure. So I've been like playing with how to like stuff them, what to stuff them with. But also another fascinating concept was like, I'm usually making things for a person to wear it, and these are not meant to be worn. So there was like an internal struggle of like, why am I doing this? Because no one's really, this is not being worn on the street. This is not something that someone is like using for their personal like representation, but it's being used for my personal representation. And so I've been trying to like answer this question for myself of like, why am I doing this? But I kind of need to. I don't, So.
It's just another way. You don't have a certain constraint which is that it has to be adorned by a figure. So you have to create armatures to allow for it to have its own body.
Yeah. And a lot of the things I've been like stuffing it with are scraps from my clothing, which is like part of my circular process. But it's been interesting, like figuring out this new part of my brain. It's always been there, but I'm like going further into it, and it's fascinating to me. I'm like, who am I?
It's wonderful.
Like crawled out of my ear.
Okay, so Nava, I wanted to ask you, you generously shared with us a very abundant genealogy from which you were making these works. You had shared also that you're in conversation with Islamic vessels. However, you are only capable of accessing them in this, I guess today, through museums in the West, and of course they have a very particular lens. I was just curious if you could expand on how you navigate that, and what it affords you, what it constrains.
Wow, okay.
Well, it's a softball question, but we have to talk about it. It was too interesting, I'm sorry.
It's a very rich, fertile, complex place to engage with, right? We know of the histories of like conquest and countries that conquest. It's beyond Western colonization. It's a long history of taking objects from a place to another place, right? But most recently, it's a remnants of colonial empire in the Western world, and most recently, like for example, Germany returned 22 Benin bronzes to Nigeria as part of a larger effort by Western nations to seek reconciliation. Last year, the Stanley Museum was the first in the US to return some items also to Nigeria. But on the other hand, what year was it, 2012? The Timbuktu archives were at serious risk of being burnt down by rebel fighting that was going on in the region. So there's these complex things to do with archiving of what it means and those archives were rescued because they were secretly exported quickly, and they weren't the majority of them weren't burnt away. So there's this complex history of remembrance, preserving, and extracting, which is what I'm thinking about. And also the irony is for me, as born in a state of exile, because of my political identity. So I don't have direct access to Persian archives. My only access is through the museum. And the museums, specifically that I've been to are the Aga Khan Museum in Toronto, which is a museum of Islamic art. And here at the Met, the Met is so great, but it's fraught with these weird histories. And there are these vessels that I'm very directly referencing, ceramic vessels that have Arabic text in them from literally the Persian Empire, with poetry and proverbs and warnings and all sorts written on them. So for me, I think, I'm thinking about these acts of reclamation on a very personal level, both, and it's complex because it's reclamation from numerous governments and histories, right? Both historic and present day. Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. It's an act of reclamation. It's an act of also creating your own, I don't know, notch in this history. You are taking something from the past and creating something that will continue on into the future. Does that?
I didn't think of that, but that's a good point. Because ceramic is something that's incredibly archival.
Yeah.
We have these relics when civilizations have gone to dust, the ceramics remain. So it is a very interesting material in terms of its archival value. So yeah. when this civilization goes to shit, my hopefully the glazes will last.
Yes. Period. Yes, period. Sangeeta, you shared, I thought this was such an amazing story that when you were younger, you were visiting family in India and your parents sent you to be an apprentice with a natural dyer. Could you talk more about that story and how it influenced you?
This was about in 2017. I was still in college, and then I would spend my summers like 3-4 months in India because I had nothing better to do than to hang out with my parents. But then my mom had come across a natural dyer, and my parents, they're very like encouraging, very supportive, and I'm very lucky for that. They like always have pushed me to like learn different skills. And they came across a natural dyer who lived, we lived in the south, and the dyer was up in the north of India, and they were like, oh, you should spend a few weeks with her, you should learn something. Because I knew I had an interest with like flowers and dyeing, but I didn't really know like how to start. And so I spent a few weeks with the natural dyer in a city called Ahmedabad, and I learned a lot of like the traditional techniques of dyeing, and learned from the block printers, the artisans, and how dye was made, and natural sources. But I took all of this knowledge, but I found it hard, especially when I came back to the US, I found it hard to replicate, because you need like a lot of, you need a lot of pots and pans, you need a lot of water, you need space, and I didn't have any of that. And I came across this technique called bundle dyeing, which incorporates like which the 3 works behind you were made with that process and technique, placing botanicals on fabric and then rolling it into a bundle and then steaming it. So I have a tendency to save a lot of like my kitchen scraps, or I use a lot of my dried flowers and whatever I have around me, and that's kind of the beauty of that process, is kind of extending these natural materials in a more longer way. But yeah, that's kind of the brief story.
Yeah, I'd love to hear it. It's just such a unique way of being in conversation with a tradition, and then also, taking the parts that you resonate with and you can reproduce, and centering it within your own practice.
Absolutely. I think one more point is that I'm inspired by a lot of like my roots, but I'm also finding ways to reframe that tradition through a new lens that feels right and more present to me as a person. And I think bundle dyeing was that method for me.
So wonderful. Logan, you have described, okay, so we're in a new world. You're creating these armatures. I'm curious, what is the significance of these oceanic themed vessels? Because we have stalactite, it's giving cave. There are things that resemble aquatic creatures, or certainly creatures.
Yeah.
So what's the significance of that kind of iconography?
I mean, so part of my practice, and like specifically my like fashion design, is that I'm always kind of coming up with new worlds and like places that are like very much inspired by what is here on Earth, but I'm like imagining like if there was a portal opening up, where would this go to another planet, another dimension that's like looks like it's from here, but it's a little bit different, and you're like kind of scared of it, but you're like wanting to tackle it. So I like specifically have been in the sea cave region lately, which I am like, sometimes I'm like, maybe I should get out of this world and do something else, but then I find myself back in it. And I, especially in July, I went to Spain and I went snorkeling, and there was like, it's like the clearest waters, and there's like all these rocks, and you're like kind of scared of the rocks, and you're like, is there something lurking? Like something gonna grab me? Is a wave gonna like totally crush me? But if you just like go a little bit further, like what could I see? The like mystery is also still very present. So I'm like kind of doing this in a way, it's like very symbolic of like how I'm trying to like dive deeper into like my practice and like what I am. And so I'm feeling like these caves. I'm feeling like I need to go further into like the depths, even though I'm a little bit scared, because I'm like, what am I gonna find? Like, it might be sparkly, it might be really dark, it could be anything, but I'm like really inspired by like what could be further. And also creatures underwater and in caves are just so weird and cool, and they have these like senses that we don't understand. And I like love the idea of the way they move around corners, and like they're not really seeing the way we're seeing, and they're not communicating the way we're communicating, but yet they like are surviving just as well, and they're like having these whole lives that I'm just like, what are you? Like what, like you're just like sticking to this wall and that's your life. But like that sounds kind of awesome. And I'm like, what does that feel like? What would I be doing if I were that thing? So yeah, I'm like trying to learn about myself, but also like, I don't know, maybe we are those weird little crawly things under the rocks. We all are that. So yeah.
I was going to ask, it's like, it sounds like you're doing a psychological dive, but you married it with literally going and seeing for yourself.
Yeah.
And can you share, what are some of these like additional senses that we don't have that these underwater creatures might?
I mean, I think it's more like they're seeing underwater. Are they not seeing underwater? There's some things we just don't totally understand. I mean, I don't understand because I'm not a scientist, but I'm like, we would try to swim in these waters and we couldn't see anything, but yet they get around perfectly, and they're like, they just have a different type of sense. Like they are able to use their sight, they're able to use their touch differently, and I think it's really inspiring in a way that I'm like, I think we can use touch more than we do, especially out of all of our senses. I think we're very overloaded by sight and sound, and I think if we can like figure out how to touch around a wall, maybe that would be helpful.
Yeah, it makes sense that you would have empathy because sculpture is so tactile.
Yeah. I don't know if that answered your question.
These are just jumping off points. Yeah. They're not like, we're gonna figure it out. So Nava, you have mentioned that you've worked through so many different types of, so many different disciplines.
Yeah.
And you also mentioned in our conversation that you you were part of the William Kentridge residency. We were able to work with dancers and musicians, which is so fabulous. And it offered you an opportunity to, work interdisciplinary, which seems very natural for you. Could you talk about that and how this kind of working in so many disciplines is a liminal space unto itself?
Yeah. Wow. Your questions are really good. A liminal space unto itself. Damn.
Forgive me for saying the word liminal. Forgive, please. I know.
Did she say it a lot? Okay, so...
It's just art speak, but it's truly what we're talking about. The space between worlds. How about that? It's the space between worlds.
I mean, it's a really cool residency where the curators are invited, and then curators invite artists. And it's like up to 15 artists at a time, all of which are performance artists, except for one visual artist left there to find their way. So it was like really cool for me to be there because I got to work with people and mediums that I've never worked with before, and I had this like incredible skill set at my disposal, and they had mine too, because the whole thing was encouraging cross collaboration between all of the artists. So every artist made their own work, and they invited other artists to participate with them in making their work. So it was very meaningful for me to do this in South Africa, because I got to like work with South African artists at a time when shit was hitting the fan in Iran. A young woman was murdered for not wearing her headscarf correctly at the time. So I got to explore these themes of like migration, thinking about my familiar histories of moving from Iran to South Africa, Southern Africa, and I was collaborating with like audio from like the protests on Instagram, and like oral histories that I collected with my mom and her sister, which is my aunt, and then with these artists. And I loved that they brought in their own interpretations of movements that I wanted to explore. So like a dervish whirl mixed with a Zulu step was like a really cool outcome, or these like because it is straddling these different worlds in myself, which is also where the title comes from. I titled the show Meet Me Between Tehran and Mbabane. So one is where like my mother's childhood is, and one is where my childhood was, and I'm somewhere in between that. So yeah, it's very meaningful and powerful to have done that in South Africa. And then from there, I came to New York, and I was able again to collaborate with other artists here. And the artists, I got to bring in people of Iranian descent and African descent, and make this cool fusion of like Persian piano with African percussion, Iranian dance moves with like West Africa. The dancer that I could find was West African, so West African. Yeah, but it really meant a lot to like work with people from different backgrounds and different artistic expressions to like make this like incredible concoction, and really like draw on their skills, because I don't have those skills. So I'd be like, something like this. A lot of the time they'd be like, what exactly do you mean? Something. And they brought, they had to bring in, through my incompetence, they had to also bring in their own competencies, which made something really beautiful. And also like straddling of like, yes and no and maybe. It's like, I think it's also what a curator goes through, is like, yes and the yes and, or like maybe not that, but it's a lot of like thinking through on how to take a place of leadership in a deeply collaborative way. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like being a creative director.
Yeah,
Among my many skills, they include. Wow, that's so fantastic. It's interesting because I was thinking about it from the perspective of like you as an artist working in many disciplines, but it sounds like it was an opportunity to do collage with other people's practices.
Yeah, and mine.
And yours.
And mine, yeah. Yeah, because I ended up making shadow puppets. And that's also like drawing very much on the photography background of like working with light and shadow. So yeah, it was integrating the dancers with the shadows and the shadow puppets. The musicians were amazing. Yeah, like live musician in a show.
Incredible.
Musicians. And in the future iteration, I want like a whole orchestra.
Of course. Well, I really want to see that, so we'll have to have another.
Yeah.
We'll have to have
more money.
Another time.
More money, less problems.
Okay, Samhita. So we've discussed that you have through using natural materials, there's like something implicit within them that they have a particular life cycle.
Yes.
And your work perhaps extends them a bit, but I was just wondering if you could speak to that that cycle of death, rebirth, transformation that isn't palpably present in your work.
Yeah. Ooh. I think material-wise, I always gravitate to natural materials, clay, paper, textiles, made with natural dyes. I think the cycles of life are implicit with these materials. I think, I don't know how, I think it's the impermanence is a part of it. I haven't really thought so much about this process. I just, because it's so inherent that I'm going to work with something that's going to break. I'm going to work with something that's where colors are going to fade. The glaze might crack, or it might break in the kiln, or the paper might not form when I place it on the mold. I think I just know that intuitively when I make something that, okay, it's going to break, I'm going to mend it. And there's always this aspect of like mending and fixing and breaking, and that's what I love about these materials. It is a cycle of life, and like nothing really lasts forever. But it's, I think for me, that the cycle of life, or decay and things, renewing itself. It's also for me, they seem like abstract feelings, but I think these physical things, I don't know, it
seems like, well, if anything, it feels like an attitude of celebration.
Yeah.
Where you're not hiding from it, you're not negating it, you're not keeping it separate, nor it feels like it's a way of positively incorporating mortality into the physical presence of the work. But maybe it might not be the meaning of the work, but it seems like it's certainly underlying it.
Yeah. I don't know, I think it's because I believe that there is a cycle that I don't think so much about things.
Yes.
I think when you put it so explicitly, I'm like, oh yeah, things are going to things are going to happen. But I think, it's just like I said, I gravitate to these materials because of that cycle. Yeah.
Love it. Okay, Logan. So something that's common in this way is that, Logan, your practices in Lagoon, as well as I assume in these materials as well, there's an act of sustainability. And I'm just curious, like, how did that theme come about, and like, what does it mean in your work?
I'm also super interested in like life cycles of materials, and even though not every material I use is a natural fiber, comes from a natural place, it does come from somewhere. And with like, especially the textile and fashion industry being like the wasteful world it is, I knew like as soon as I was like, I knew when I was going into this world that I was gonna try to like combat that, or at least not add to the waste. So all of my materials like already start from either like vintage origins or like dead stock or scraps. I used to work in a production room sewing, and would just like collect all the things that were going into the fabric bins after we would cut out, and like, these people don't want this, I'll use it. So I'm definitely always trying to like continue the cycle of like materials around me and like continue the orbit that they're in. But I'm also like, I think I mentioned earlier that my scraps from my garments, I like try to find a place for in the future, whether they're in these crazy shapes or I make like little stuffies or like whatever, I will find a use for it. And I kind of in this world, like a feed the seed moment, where I'm like, you're putting good things into a thing to go somewhere else, and that's gonna birth something else. And then eventually it's like, it is just one big cycle. So it's just like a circular production that actually this has given me an opportunity to even further, because there's only so many little stuffies I can take with my hands that hurts. But if I'm making a giant form, I'm like, that, no telling how many dresses and pants I made to like stuff that piece. So it just, this has been a fun opportunity to be like, it's like growing my circle. Like I was doing this circle and now it's this circle, and now they're all like a big web of circles. And I love the idea for like a future concept. I want to like combine other circles and other people's life cycles of materials. And like what if we all have something in there, like a little time capsule, a little like something that we brought to the table because we're all using things every day, and it's like it is going somewhere, it is coming from somewhere. So I want to talk about that more for sure.
Yeah, it feels like an acknowledgement of being part of something bigger than oneself. And it's a form of respect for the environment and ethical responsibility to do right by where you came. Earth. Radical concept. Care about the earth. So Nava, one thing that we haven't discussed yet about your vessels pieces in particular are the text and the role of geometry in creating a form. And I was just curious if you could share with the audience the inscription and what it means to you.
So the vessels have predominantly two sets of text in them. They either say 𝙤𝙬 𝙽𝙤 or 𝙍𝙬𝙬. They're both very welcoming words, usually said around food or drink, or feasting, or just sitting around a table or coming into someone's home. But 𝙤𝙬 𝙽𝙤 directly translated means may it nourish your soul. So it's, I think it's reflective of a very poetic language and people. When I first came to New York, I did a calligraphy class, Farsi calligraphy class at the Persian Institute that's now closed. But it's very interesting in that calligraphy is actually very mathematical and numerological. So, everything is in relation to the points or the dots, which also in Persian, Arabic, Islamic numerology is profoundly meaningful as well. The noqteh, the starting points, the primal points. So anyway, I had to figure out how to fit those in a bowl. And it became very mathematical, measuring the circumference, measuring the letters, to make them beautiful, aesthetic, proportional. There is a history and a lineage that I'm drawing on with the actual text itself, in terms of the calligraphy application of them.
Yeah, and it's also, can you speak more about how, because it's in the shape of a vessel that would nourish them, what does that mean for the viewer? Could you speak to more to this act of care?
Yeah. Hold on, I made notes about that. Let me
Please,
just reference this. Because off the top of my head it's not coming. Background. Language. Yeah, it's to do, the very basic notion of language, holding culture, and also this connection between language, the language of may it nourish your soul. So it's the interconnection between the physical body and the spiritual that comes across in the words. So, but in terms of the viewer, I think it's really interesting in terms of who is the one who's receiving it. Because if you're a Farsi speaker, I think it means so much. And that's the interesting thing of language. There are things that you can say in language that are translated with a lot of difficulty that are very culturally specific. Whereas when you're able to speak the language, it opens up these worlds to you. Yes, is there anything I'm missing from our earlier conversations?
I love that. I mean, I have so many more questions, but it's really what can we allow? Well, in this context, I think that is going to be all the questions that I have right now, and I want to open it up to the audience. Does anyone else have questions burning questions that they want to ask? What about all the questions that I planted in the audience? Remember, I came up and I whispered a question in your ear, and I said, "Can you talk to us about that?"
Yeah.
No? Okay.
Logan, so would this material maybe have become a dress or pants or something if it didn't The work?
Possibly. It hadn't, well, one of it used to be a pillow on my couch that I then transformed into a tube. But possibly, I hadn't thought that far. But it could have been that. It could have been, as you know, I make miniatures as well. So I'm like looking at that, like that would be really cool to make a tiny cave. I think maybe I will, because I have some scraps. So yes, it could have been anything.
Oh wait, should we give you a mic? Goodness gracious. Sorry, let me, please.
Okay, this is now pressure is on.
Yes.
My question is for Nava. So when you have the idea to like begin on the process of making one of the bowls, obviously you probably are in a certain like emotional place with the origin of that idea. Does that change for you over the course of its like the process of making it?
Yeah, it's, well, so the first few couple of bowls that I made, the bigger ones, were part of a larger installation. And there they were just initially pointing to the idea of that installation. And, you know, in terms of their scale, they're pretty large. It really made me think and connect to the ancestors that I was referencing in terms of their process of writing in the bowls that I was referencing, right? And also it made me think about like what the hell glazes were they using? Because, you know, in some of them I'm using underglazes which require like 3 to 5 layers of the same glaze for it to get the depth of color. And you can imagine for those thin lines to go over it again and again on this large scale, to redraw this like line without messing it up. Because I also put a layer of glaze underneath that glaze. It's a lot about process, so I couldn't erase. Like I had to like get it right. But once I got like the kind of dimension, yeah, for the first, let's say 5 to 10. No, I know there's only 8 here. For the first handful, like I worked out the numerology individually, like took a measuring tape around, broke that open, divided it by 5, 8, whatever, which could work out a nice number to make text from. And then I started figuring out that I could write in half of it, or I could free flow a little bit better, so that it made it easier and it opened it up more. Yeah, yeah. Also, my skill in throwing developed as well. So.
It's a good skill.
I know.
Is there anyone else? All right, thank you guys.
Thank you. Thanks for coming.
And we also have some treats and seltzer and wine, so please help yourself.
Thank you.
Hi.
Hi. Welcome back.
I know. I was like,
everybody
everybody
was
was
congratulations.
I like you guys zoned out at some point because I was like, and then she asked me a question, and I was like, oh shit.
That's very picturesque.
I felt that way a lot. I was hearing my name.
How
was
was
jarring.
home?
I know.